Okay, so the next thing to look at is our frequency balance, which means we're going to be looking at equalization. We're going to be using Smart EQ3 for this, which is in the bundle, and we're also going to potentially use this analyzer a little bit just to give us a bit of extra information, primarily about the sub range and the kind of low end, which is very important with bass music generally, hence in the name. So there's a couple of things I just want to quickly do to this analyzer before we get into Smart EQ3, just to make sure it's giving us the most useful information. Now, all analyzers are a little bit different in terms of how they interpret the information that you're feeding them and how they then represent it back to you, and they often have lots of different settings you can kind of mess around with. So you can see even in this one you've got some basic settings here that you can kind of tweak, but I mean there's loads of stuff actually in here that you can kind of mess with if you want to like really customize its behavior. Now obviously that's a bit much if you're maybe a bit new to using analyzers and don't really understand what slope, decay, time resolution, averaging, and all of these things kind of mean. So what I would say, having had a bit of a mess around with this, is quite a useful setting is this average plus infinite plus maximum setting. So I'm just going to kind of load that up. Now what it does have here is it has a kind of like normalization setting that's turned on by default. It's this little blue button here. So essentially what we're seeing at the moment is like the noise floor, which is potentially the dither from the limiter that's being boosted up. So if I turn this off, yeah, then it's gone. Now we can't hear this. This is ridiculously quiet. It's just the analyzer like kind of artificially boosting it in the visualization so that we can kind of see what's going on. If we turn this off, you can see it just disappears completely. And now it will give us something that is a bit more reliable. So with the normalization on, let's say if you have a file that's hitting minus, a sound that's hitting -20, and then it's followed by a sound that's hitting -2, the analyzer is going to try and push all of them up to the top. So it's not super representative of like the actual levels that everything's hitting, which is why I say to turn this off, this normalization off, so that when we get into talking about our low end, we can actually maybe talk about some sort of solid targets to hit, some like consistent levels to kind of hit. So so before we kind of get into the specifics of this track and some targets maybe that you want to try and keep in mind a little bit when you're mastering your stuff and mixing your stuff, let's just have a quick look at Smart EQ3. Now this is a really great EQ plugin. I definitely rate it. It's very, very fast, very flexible. It sounds great. So in the most kind of immediate and obvious kind of use case, it's a very, very quick parametric EQ. You can add bands by double clicking. You can remove them by double clicking again. You can drag them around with your mouse. You can use your scroll wheel to change the cue. Now you have all the various different controls actually at the bottom here for the band that you currently have selected. So if I add another one, you can see it nicely color codes it for us. And depending whichever one I've got selected, it's going to color code this bottom bar as well. So we can really quickly see what band we're actually working with. And we can either do what I was just doing and use various mouse controls to manipulate this, or you can mess with the numbers at the bottom here. You can click on it as well, just a single click, and you can type in a value, say 500 hertz there, and we can boost it by 6 dB. You can also switch between stereo mode, or you can switch into mid and side as well. We're probably just going to use stereo mode rather than mid-side mode, and you can solo it as well. So currently we would just be listening. If I just play, I'm just going to play a little bit of the intro. We can just be focusing. Now you can also achieve that solo mode by holding down Control and dragging. So that's kind of useful. I like stuff where, especially in EQs where you don't have to click away in other parts of the plugin too much. You can just sort of grab a node, hold down a modifier key, and it does actually give you a list of all the modifier keys if you just kind of hover your mouse over it, which is really, really handy. So you can actually right click and pop out a little display here as well that gives you access to the same kind of stuff down here. Yeah, so I forgot to say you can also change your band mode by right clicking down here. You can see you've got shelves and cuts, or you can do it when you right click here and you can change it to different types as well. So all in all, very, very quick, even if you use it as just kind of like a basic parametric EQ, very quick, very flexible, sounds great. Now, I think by default, the analyzer is off. You can turn that on here, and it will give us a kind of spectrum analyzer, very similar to our Melder one, albeit maybe giving you a little bit less information that's kind of in the background. I find that's really helpful when you're EQing stuff to just have a bit of visual feedback on where you're working. Yeah, I find that's really helpful to give you a bit of visual feedback on where you're working. And just see, okay, I can see where my sub is. I can see, where certain things are hitting. Sometimes it can even reveal to you, oh, there's a big spike happening in a certain place, or a bit of a hole as well. Sometimes in the mid range that happens that you can maybe boost back in. So yeah, great, really flexible, really quick. Yeah, great plugin. All in all, has some other kind of nifty features, like you can actually adjust the mid-side balance here if you feel like it as well, which is something that I've not seen so simply represented. And you can actually pan the sides kind of separately from the mids as well, which is something that I don't see very often. So we're not going to be doing that because we want to keep our stereo information pretty like sort of centered, I suppose, even though it's the side information. Pretty symmetrical, I suppose, is a good way of putting it. But it's kind of good to know that that's there. Now it does have some smart kind of AI or machine learning driven features as well built into it, and that's kind of where the smart part comes in. So you can see at the top here we have this drop down where it says universal at the moment, and you can go into this factory profiles and you can see they've actually built loads of profiles for different types of instruments and vocals and things like that. Now, if you're using this on an individual track, then you could say, okay, I've got like a keys track, for example. You'd play some of the audio and then you hit this analyze button or learn button, and it will basically analyze the sound that's coming into it and come up with a curve that it thinks will sort of optimize and clean up that sound as best as it can. And essentially what you're doing when you're selecting one of these is you're like priming the AI engine to kind of get the best results, basically. Now, obviously we're working with a full track, so universal is going to be the way to go. So I've found sort of sometimes slightly mixed results with this. It can be kind of a good place to start. So there's a couple of tracks I've run through it where it's given me quite a good like curve where it's kind of doing the things that I would like expect it to do, and or things that I would personally do like manually with an EQ. It's kind of already doing that. So you might find that sometimes it really helps to like clean up. It helps to give you like a good idea of what you should be doing, and maybe does a little bit of that for you. Now, I'm going to run an analysis on this now. So I'm going to run an analysis on this now, and I'm just going to play a bit of audio, hit this learn button, and we'll see it kind of going through and analyzing. So it's come up with a good curve for us here, which makes quite a lot of sense to me. It's done a little bit of a boost in the low end, which is something that I was going to boost maybe a couple of dB anyway, and I'll kind of get onto exactly why that is in a minute. It's controlled our highs a little bit. This is sort of plus 5K. It's kind of dipped it out where our cymbals and things are, which is probably a good idea. I feel like maybe it's like overkill a little bit, but you know, that's where taste starts to come into it. But, you can see it's given us a good idea. It's saying, okay, maybe you're a little bright on the top end. Maybe you could do with a little more sub on the low end. So yeah, it's given us a nice kind of adaptive curve. Now, there's some things you can do with this curve to like then kind of edit it to your own specifications. So let's say for me personally, I don't really like the fact that it's doing all this control on the top end. I'm probably going to do a bit of that manually, but I'd like to be able to have a bit more control actually than just following this curve. So I can pull in this bracket on the right hand side, and just make sure that it's like leaving that kind of area basically untouched. You can see we've got like a flat white line here, and this white line is always going to be our, showing you what our smart filter is actually doing. Now we can adjust the amount by dragging this green node kind of up and down, so we can actually invert it if we want to as well. Now it's kind of up here. Now I think probably we'll kind of adjust that to taste in a minute. Now there is something quite cool you can do where once you've got this selected, and you can see we've got our green smart band, it's got the Smart EQ symbol here, so we know it's our smart band. See this plus symbol on the side? If I click that, it's going to split it into 2 bands for us. Now this is really handy in this kind of context because we now have, we can now basically maybe change this band a little bit, and we can have independent control over our sub level here. So I think by default it was boosting it by like maybe 5 dB or something, which is quite a lot. And we probably don't really need it that much. So it's nice to have a bit of control over that and to be able to separate mid-range from low end as well. So even though you might not want to like, explicitly like just go with the curve that it gives you as it gives it to you, you can kind of use it as a starting point to like at least start to maybe get a bit of an idea about where you should be going in terms of boosts and cuts. But also you can kind of then customize it further and really like kind of hone in on the areas where you feel like it actually needs a change, and then maybe leave areas where you feel like it's less of a problem alone.